Oh. Hey guys, Andrew G here. So today I am doing my first YouTube video on this channel, and it is the most exciting game you'll ever see, which is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Super exciting, interesting game. So I set the speedrun world record for this game about a month and a half ago, and I've been meaning to do a commentary on it, and I just thought about it this week. Which is why I've been talking about it. And I finally got the chance to just sit down and be able to do this. So I just want to explain a little bit about how I got into this game and why I decided to speedrun it and go into the mechanics and such of this game, how it works and everything. So I was not expecting to get the world record for this. But I got a super lucky run. Really, the luckiest run I've ever had was this run. Somehow, some things didn't spawn in different stages, but it's kind of what makes this game interesting, is because what's interesting about this game is that no two games are really the same. Different enemies, different things will spawn at different places. Some things are the same, like some things are consistent, but there's a lot of things that aren't. Like the spiders will move, and things will get thrown at you differently than you've ever seen before. Or it seems that every time I do a session of this game, that something unusual happens that I've never even seen before. So just that alone kind of makes this game interesting. So how I got started doing this was I had watched the Angry Video Game Nerd and Mike Matei's videos, and I just saw how awful this game was, and it looked terrible, and it looked difficult, and I kind of wanted to check it out, especially because I think the first video I ever saw was, the first one they ever uploaded. I think they just showed how awful the game was, and they didn't delve into it that much, just showed just how ridiculous it was a little bit, and that it was terrible, and that was basically the end of it. So I decided to pick it up. I saw it at a game shop for like $3 or something. So I might as well try it. I'll play it once or something. But I ended up playing it, and it was pretty challenging. So I decided to keep going with it, and committed to beating it. And once I finally beat it, I thought, wow, this is actually a pretty challenging game, despite how stupid it is, despite how slow it is, and despite all the nonsense that this game has. So decided to run this game. Now I should probably talk a little bit about what's going on in the run. But if you've been watching it so far, it just, you probably noticed that a lot of things are just really strange with it. Right here I actually do a glitch at the side of the screen. This is something that I found. You push yourself into the side of the screen, and you can fall through it to get to the very right edge. And this usually helps you avoid some obstacles. It's not foolproof, but it definitely helps improve your time. So Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. The goal of the game is just to reach the end, like all games, but you're trying to get to your wedding, and you are walking really slow the whole time to get there. Basically, the goal of the game is just to avoid everything at all costs. And if you get hit, if you get hit by the explosions, or any of these cats or dogs or the spiders or a bird craps on you or any number of things, um, you lose your meter, which is your Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde meter. If it goes all the way down, you turn from Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde. And for a speed run, this wastes about 35 seconds. And for this reason, it's almost always beneficial to waste 10 to 15 seconds instead of, risking turning into Mr. Hyde by accident. I've actually never had a run that didn't transform into Mr. Hyde. I think this run only did it one time, which is the best I've ever done. And this run was like the luckiest run I've ever done at the same time. So turning into Mr. Hyde, once you turn into Mr. Hyde, you have to turn back into Dr. Jekyll. And the way you turn back into Dr. Jekyll is you have to shoot or punch enemies. And once you kill enough of them, you can turn back into Dr. Jekyll and continue on your way. One interesting thing is, but it doesn't really relate to the speedrun, but one interesting thing is that if you pass Dr. Jekyll's location as Mr. Hyde, you'll get struck by lightning and the game will kill you. And you'll get a game over, actually. I discovered a way to actually bypass this. Something I noticed that was kind of strange was the pause mechanic as Mr. Hyde. I noticed that if you held the pause button, you can actually kind of float through the air as Mr. Hyde. So I experimented with it a little bit. I was curious to see if you could maybe pass Dr. Jekyll as Mr. Hyde, because you're not supposed to be able to do this, and I thought it could maybe result in some interesting things, which it did. This is actually the tactic that I used for the good ending speedrun. But what you do is you take a hit. You take a hit as Mr. Hyde, and then immediately pause the game at the spot that you are passing Dr. Jekyll. You hold pause the whole time, and because you're being hit technically the whole time, the game basically can't register the fact that you've reached the spot where you're supposed to game over. And this was just something that I stumbled upon. I don't even know how I found it, to be honest, because it's such a strange thing, but I kind of tend to find weird things in games. But I don't use that in this speedrun specifically, but I do use it in the good ending speedrun, which is if you beat the game as both Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll. If you beat the game as Mr. Hyde, all the enemies disappear, and you can just walk to the end as Dr. Jekyll. So in the good ending run, I actually bypass Dr. Jekyll early so that I can just walk to the end of the game as Dr. Jekyll once I beat the game as Mr. Hyde. Sorry, it's a little bit confusing once you it's confusing to explain because the game mechanics are so strange. So basically you're not supposed to be able to pass Dr. Jekyll as Mr. Hyde until stage 6. But I did it, I think, in stage 2 or something like that. So it kind of resulted in some weird effects. So right here I'm doing a screen glitch, and I actually made a big mistake, and I probably wasted 8 or 9 seconds with that error. So this glitch, it's helpful because it keeps you from getting hit, but as you can just see, I actually took a hit in this run specifically. Sometimes you can avoid taking hits altogether with it, but usually the game will throw something strange at you and it'll cause you to get hit. So even though this glitch is like, it looks kind of cheap, it's actually not that as beneficial as you might think. It's most beneficial in this stage, which is stage 4. Simply because you don't have to stop for all these bees and the spiders and all that, or the explosions. If I do a run, I think my best run without doing these screen glitches was 22 minutes. This time my time for this was 20 minutes and 47 seconds. So it saves about a minute and a half to do the glitches. I think there's a benefit to doing it in each way, but obviously as a speedrunner, I want to do the fastest methods. This was something that I actually found myself, so I thought it would be kind of neat to show it off to people. So, game is kind of slow. It's not the most entertaining run ever, but I will say if you stumble upon this game, give it a shot, because it's a horrible game, but the challenge is really there. Like, as far as the NES goes, too, the NES, it's notoriously difficult, and that's one of the main reasons that I play Nintendo games. The challenge of it is just what makes it fun sometimes. Maybe that's the only fun thing about it. This run started out as a complete joke. I decided to beat the game, and then I said, maybe I'll do a speed run. I thought this is probably the worst game you could possibly speed run because it's so slow. It's like speed running a walking simulator. But that's sort of the reason that I did it. I've actually gotten some competition from different people. Lucha Jim was one person that I actually had the world record before, and he stole the record. See, I think someone stole the record, like Jaguar something stole the record, and then Lucha Jim put the mark, like they beat me by several minutes, and then I came back and did not expect to get anything, and just managed to get this run just mostly by being lucky. I will say I have a lot of experience with the last stage now. The last stage is kind of where it all comes down to, what it all comes down to. The last stage is essentially Donkey Kong. So, one interesting thing I found is, so you can actually kill the bees with the cane. One other really interesting thing is that you can actually, if you duck and put your head into the bee, you can actually kill the bee that way as well. Like, I always say, like, oh yeah, you just you kill the bee with a cane, or you absorb the bees into your skull. Makes a lot of sense, This game makes a lot of sense in general. So, so those are supposed to be cats. Those gray things. That's supposed to be a dog. I guess there's gophers that throw rocks at you. I don't know what those really are. So as far as this run goes, I've only taken damage. I've only lost half my meter the whole game. I usually, at this point, like, I've usually turned into Mr. Hyde at least once, usually 2 times. So getting a run this far, even with the glitch, um, is unusual. I don't think I've ever had a run that was really this good. This stage 2, I got really lucky because I think like a dog didn't show up or something at this spot here, or I jumped. I don't know what it was, or I jumped over it or something. Anyway, like I usually take a hit on this stage, and then I end up losing about a minute or something like that. But we are at the last stage, and now is where the game actually becomes interesting. From everything else, I didn't talk about it much because it's not even really interesting. Here we go. So it's Donkey Kong time, and you got to jump over these barrels. I actually strategically take damage from the barrels to avoid the explosion blasts. Because if you get hit by an explosion, you turn into Mr. Hyde almost guaranteed. And like I said, it wastes about 35 seconds. Like that time, I took a hit from the barrel intentionally. Somehow, I didn't even lose that much meter from these barrel hits. But you can see it's a ridiculous struggle here. So this is what I'm talking about. The game is actually speeding up. All the sprites are speeding up because of the singing lady. And I don't know why that happens, but the game is like overclocking. Jumping these barrels, it's like I've gotten so good at figuring out ways to avoid everything. Like you can go through the door to avoid the explosions. You have to walk away from the guy as soon as he drops it, and jump. If almost always jump. So the bomb. So manipulation is kind of tricky. So this was the first time I turned into Mr. Hyde, and this is actually interesting too. You can shoot these like what is it called? The psycho beam or psycho wave or something like that at these jumping brains, and I even got lucky here too because I got a lot of jumping brains spawn right away. So that I could, like, this is one of the fastest Hyde transformations I've ever had. Like, you can do it a little, I have done it a little bit faster than this, but that is about as best as you're going to get. I was kind of bummed out that I turned into Mr. Hyde at all, because I was doing so well up until that point. I think right here is where the like teleports if you it's so strange. There's something to do with the singing lady and the explosions. If they happen at the same time, I think they kind of cancel each other out or something strange. At least that's what I've noticed. So here I do the glitch again. It's hard. It's actually a little bit harder on the last stage. When the explosions happen, you have to actually turn left. Like I turn left every time a barrel passes or anything is about to hit me. It causes Dr. Jekyll to be on the right side of the screen even though you're on the left, because half of your body is actually on the right side of the screen. Kind of confusing. But the game is, if you notice, the game is actually speeding up a little bit. And I don't know why this happens again, but very beneficial to me because, dang, I'm just like, oh, I can basically run through these barrels. Like, okay, this is like absolutely terrifying, getting hit by everything. And a glitch guy, the usual. At a certain point, I'm just like, I don't even know what's going on. I just winging it and hoping and praying that I don't die. At this point, I was pretty confident that I wasn't going to turn into Mr. Hyde again, because I had half a meter, which is really good. Like on the last stage, you end up turning into Mr. Hyde like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. It's like, I can't even understand how lucky this run was. That's what I have to stress the most. That basically, I just got extremely lucky. I got extremely lucky, and I have a lot of experience with this game now. So I hate this part because you're right at the end. You're right at the end, and yet you have to keep turning back to avoid everything. I almost lost all my meter. I didn't realize how close I was to losing it. See, that part, I could have gone forward and jumped it and got to the end, but I was so afraid to do that. So, oops. It was 2047. I stopped it. I stopped it late. So this is the end. End. Isn't it such an exciting ending? This is so great. You've reached your wedding and reached the church. What do you get? You get this wonderful celebration. It's all worth it because of this moment. It's like, isn't this great? So that's Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I'm a strange person. I actually enjoy doing this speedrun, and someday I kind of want to get under 20 minutes. But I actually took there were 4 speedrun records for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I actually beat all of them. There's this one, there's the good ending, which is beating the game as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then there is a Famicom run, which is even harder than the NES version, which is crazy. And then there's the good ending at the Famicom run. And those runs were just like, man, I can't even... It's so much harder on the Famicom than it is the NES, which is ridiculous because the NES version is really tough. And